Hey, this is Cap, and you're watching Thorin, the only man besides Richard Lewis who somehow found a way to get both League of Legends and Dota Redditors to hate him.
As esports has grown, the buzzword which seems to be ubiquitous is ecosystem. The notion that everything in esports exists at the same time, together, and is in some sense connected, perhaps in a symbiotic relationship, perhaps in a parasitic relationship, however you want to define it. But it's kind of the idea of we're all in the same boat, and as long as the boat's still afloat and it's still going in the right direction, we're all going to succeed. So you can't just take one person and throw them off, or one person say, I'm going this direction, you're going this direction. It's not going to work overall. So it's not just about a pro player making the highest salary he can make, because what if that comes at the cost of teams being vaguely approaching profitability and then being able to leverage having good players into making some sort of solid ROI from sponsors, from tournament organizers, from prize money, etc. It's not just about developers of the game deciding like gods with their IP rights which tournament organizer can run an event and getting them all to bid up and against each other. If that then means that the tournament organizers that win the bid, as it were, and make the event, have practically tiny margins, little slivers of where they can make profit, or they can make some money, or they don't have to just spend massive amounts and take on board risky investment themselves potentially and risk the future of their company. But one thing that seems disconnected is it seems like there are so many esports orgs who don't see how they exist in an ecosystem with endemic content creators, people from esports who are content creators, and how this could be a very mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. It's not simply that the esports content creator is a parasite on the back of the esports org and he's just getting his fame off it, because sure, the esports org might not, if they're a smaller person, get much exposure from it, which was the natural currency that the content creator could bring to him. But the content creator has something of value that he can offer the esports org in how he creates his content and the type of content creation that the esports org actually needs. And so certainly endemic content creators, many of them need esports orgs. But what's misunderstood, I feel, or undervalued, is how much these endemic esports orgs need the content creators. Because it is ridiculous to me that when an endemic content creator makes a piece which isn't controversial, it's not like calling a player out or unduly criticizing him or memeing on him or whatever. It's content that essentially is like telling the fabulous story of a player. It's of setting up the narrative of what there is to care about his success in the game and then out of the game, and his kind of his personality and how it's developed, or praising him as a top player, or including in him some sort of feature which ranks him highly and therefore affords him status within the endemic community. It is amazing to me over the years, not as much nowadays, but still with some of the big orgs now, how rarely one of those big orgs will even bother to keep track of this sort of content, check their mentions, retweet it, and therefore help it out. God forbid actually make a tweet themselves, which is always better in terms of generally getting the piece out there, because some people turn off retweets or ignore them. Now, sure, it's not in terms of the personal branding of the content creator. If you want to help that, retweet his personal account where he said it, and that might actually help you overall. But there is so much amazing content I have seen from tiny little endemic content creators who I found them when they had 80 followers, and I just followed the breadcrumb of their pieces. And those pieces never went anywhere because they had no cooperation with the big orgs, no cooperation with the player. And basically, they lived or died on maybe getting a little bit of traction on Reddit. That's about it. So I'll give you an example. If someone was to do a piece which outlined Simple's rise from like troubled individual, selfish star, playing in a bunch of teams, often lesser teams, to becoming not just a Na'Vi player, but the franchise player of Na'Vi, the savior of Na'Vi, quite frankly, from being a team falling out of relevance as an elite team, taking them all the way back to the promised land of championships, back to the major finals, winning big tournaments, even beating the team of the era, Astralis, there isn't going to be someone who tells that story who works for your org, very likely. Or he's not going to tell it well in a way that's genuine, because people are going to say, he's going to be biased to the org, or he's overplayed this aspect. You're not going to get that from non-endemics, quite frankly. They're not going to know enough about the game to be able to tell that story. So if that person who writes that really great piece doesn't get any traction, doesn't get any help in this particular sense, doesn't get to start the symbiotic relationship, he won't be able to gain and benefit on his end. That's going to be incredibly demotivating for him. His work's just not going to be out there. It can't have the same impact. The reason why this pisses me off is because whenever seemingly any non-endemic source comes in, some content creation elsewhere, whoever it might be, and they work on some content, these orgs, and they have always done this, roll out the red carpet for those people, whether it is Forbes or in the past before they got into esports with their own sub-site, ESPN, or currently the Players Tribune is the hot one. People go out of their way to promote these. Now listen, obviously these non-endemics do have access to a wider mainstream audience and a kind of exposure that the esports org might think I don't currently get within the game. So he sees the benefit for him, the symbiotic relationship overall. But what they're missing is what the endemics bring. Because in terms of narrative crafting, in terms of telling a story, nobody can come close or does come close to the endemics. And that's because we know the game. We know the players. We know the context of the game. We know the history of the game. We know what matters about the game to us and to the fans. And therefore, we're able to tie these things together and create these narratives that are incredibly powerful. They're not an artificial narrative imposed over a player. There's something that we see rising up out of it by being able to see the pattern and understand the context of what's going on. And even more so, these stories are not only being provided for the org for free in public, but they're incredibly powerful. And all the org has to do is signal boost them to their audience. Now, having a media team in general as an org, I think has still been one of the most underrated elements, because oftentimes they've tried to skimp out and they've been just paying people in mouse pads or paying people nothing and getting them as interns. So you're not going to get high quality narratives and great content creation out of that. You've got to spend for it. But what you can now make for it in terms of building a fan base, building a following, making the story seem really appealing is so massive that when you consider what it could then do to the amount of fans you have, the kinds of sponsorships you can get, how big your brand can grow overall, and the valuation of your company, what you actually spend, a few thousand here, might end up being a fraction of what you could make back in the long-term parlay of everything rolled together in that ecosystem of the hundreds of millions that your org might be worth in a few years if you go down that route. That doesn't actually require you to just have the best team in the game and win the game. So this is the thing that's crazy to me, is narratives ultimately are what connect fans to players. Very, very skilled players will have fans, okay, because they're very skilled. People can appreciate what they do in the server. But even if they are very skilled and have narratives built around them and engage with this sort of content, they will be yet more engaging for fans. They will be more exposed to the kinds of fans that you want to attract to your org, loyal fans, people who want to spend money, people who want to follow someone, people who want a hero to have. This kind of scenario, you can obviously go the other way and say there are also players who aren't that good as players, but have a great personality, have a great story. And if you can sell that now at an org that isn't being able to shell out the biggest bucks for the player who's a guaranteed winner and therefore brings with him a fan base and brings a reason to be compelled to watch him, you've got another reason to watch him. You've got this great story of this underdog guy who came up. You've got a story of a guy who was cast out from other teams, who was a misfit, who had to battle and find his own way to succeed. And he hasn't quite done it yet. So, get in now early on the story. Will he make it? Like, these are great ways to get people engaged, and they're not coming from non-endemics, they're coming from endemics. Think of someone like in League of Legends, the player Reckless, AD carrier Fnatic, one point in time briefly Elements, primarily Fnatic though. His storyline, he's been a good player, he's been a top player for many years, he's been a decorated player for many years, but his championships and his skill in the game is far less magnetic than the narrative of his whole quest to go from being this Swedish wonder boy who seemingly had everything the world before him to being someone who got stuck at a certain level, and then when his super skilled teammates of Expeke and Soaz left and Huni and Rainova left, had to go back down again and rebuild and try and work with a new team, and at times transition himself from being someone who was a background player at times to now being a central hard carry player and has all responsibility on him as the franchise face of the team. You think of that video I made where I talked about Doublelift's story with the magic trick and how that informed his later personality and his mechanical skills, or Flash's story where he hadn't even had a computer and then he became a prodigy at the game, one of the hardest ever to be played at a very young age, but then he fell off and had to go. These are more interesting than to certain kinds of fans. Obviously, you've already got a lot of the hardcore fans. You want the casual fans. You want even the casual esports fans to be watching your thing and to be engaged and to want to watch you more, right? And give you more viewing figures. These sorts of stories hook those guys. Even though when I'm telling them, I might not have mentioned a single thing about the actual in-game skill. I might not have diagrammed the play the guy made, but talking about his storyline and crafting this narrative, there are all these hooks to get a guy into the story. So no outsider can tell these stories. Because quite frankly, not only do these outsiders not know all that information, but even if they did know that information, they wouldn't know the context and therefore how to craft the story. And crucially, not just what to include in the story, but what to leave out of the story. The old iceberg principle of Hemingway, where when you know all of the story, all of the details, every aspect, you can now choose the small part of the tip that goes above the water. That's the important part. And if you tell that correctly, even without all the specific instances in the game and all the research you could do, it will infer all of that, and somehow someone will intuitively understand and get the power of the whole narrative without necessarily all aspects of it. Someone who doesn't know the scene simply cannot do that. And going and telling them how Doublelift grew up as a person with his family and his success in the LCS, they're going to actually just see that and think there is no story here. I'll impose an artificial narrative here, not realizing one of the best stories they will find in all of League of Legends is already there, but it's lurking under the water. And you have to see how his actual playing career was but the tip on the whole narrative below of all the things that built up through it and his cultural aspects and who he was as a person and then what he had to battle and overcome, then added to the context of his play and told as a narrative and woven together. That's going to be very important stuff. You can use your media team. You should get this media team, but while you're getting your media team and you're paying them and you're trying to find out what's the right budget, how much should I spend to make, and what will be worth it to build my brand, don't ignore the free media team, the little street team, the street beat team that you have already in terms of these content creators. Because if you want some selfish reasons, it's a really great way to appeal, right, to people who are massive guys who are trying to make money with big businesses and grow their business. Here are some selfish reasons you should help these guys and work with them. You can now build a relationship with that content creator. On one level, passively, you can just be nice to them by making these retweets, by having social media engagement, by getting them out, signal boosting them, doing them favors essentially. Well, guess what? There have already been studies done many times over that show that psychologically, when someone does you a favor they're not obliged to do, you will actually have a stronger bond with them. You will naturally like them more. And in fact, you will often feel as though you are obliged to reciprocate. You now owe them something. Even people who naturally didn't seem like they were very altruistic had this impulse when this took place. You can also literally build relationships that can be direct, that can be proactive, where they can be like a free media team for you. They can do the big in-depth interview that would have cost a lot for your team to do. They can be someone who, if you want to go beyond that, even helps you scout players, get information on the rest of the scene. Now, the best way to do this is the way people have often worked with me who are team owners, is do it quid pro quo. You throw this guy a few tips about your team. Oh, I'm going to release a player on this particular day. Here's a heads up of a day so you can craft some content. Don't release it until then. Or how about this? I've given you tips. Could you give me a tip as a player whose contract's coming up soon? Or someone who might be available, or someone who you think would be a good fit for my team? Or some information that you know about what a player's like behind the scenes that I can't find out publicly? Quite frankly, when it comes to some things like writing narrative stories and interviewing, most non-endemics are going to be way better than your internal media org, even if you have very good people in your internal media org, because the people internally, by a lot of the factors I've just described, actually, are going to be unduly and limited, in a limited fashion, biased towards your org, and therefore they actually will often be incapable of spelling out and really crafting the bad parts of the narrative, which set up the sweet parts. They can't get the sour part of the failure when things get wrong, because they don't want to diss the org, they don't want to seem like things are going wrong or flame a teammate. But in doing so, they're not able to get to the meat of it, which then makes that more of a satisfying story, more of an engaging, connecting story for the fan out there who's just a fan of everyone at the moment. And we're going to find out if he's going to be a fan of that player, and therefore, as a knock-on effect, your team potentially, and start to love your team as well. It's also way less likely, if you help out these people and signal boost them, that they'll be hostile towards you, that they'll feel resentment towards you, that they'll meme on you, and that they'll be as unduly harsh to you. There's a feedback loop that will be engaged where they will want to get that click, that like, that tweet. And you don't have to outright tell them like, oh, here's a Faustian pack, like say good things about me and I'll help you out. That will naturally be with the way social media works, what their brain starts to understand and what the scene starts to generate. If you want great content created about your teams, start to help out the right content creators, give their voice more of a signal boost, and you will quickly see more good content rise up around that. If you want an unselfish reason to help these people out, so if you really believe in the concept of an ecosystem, well, first of all, as I've alluded to there, it helps build good content creation. If those people who make good content, and you might even have enjoyed it, but you didn't bother boosting it or putting more weight behind it, don't make it. They don't get success from that piece, success in their career, or any sort of real career trajectory and path. You know what? They're not going to stick around, or at least very few of them are going to stick around. If people only knew how many over the years, the 17 years I've been involved in esports content creation, of content creators who were talented, who had drive, who were people who could have accomplished great things, didn't even get to stick around for enough years to get to their prime or start to master their craft, simply because they either took better but different jobs in esports as managers, coaches, commentators, working in big orgs, due to how limited content creation was and the avenues to make money, or even worse, left esports entirely, went off into the real world where they could seemingly make it much more and be more significant and have a bigger audience, more spotlight. And as a result, you're draining the talent away from where currently we need some talent, because this area is the amplifier. This is the catalyst that can take what's already there in the ecosystem and blow it up to be more important, seem more important, expose the elements that are important, and make the whole scene bigger. It's not just the cherry on top. In this particular sense, it can be like the yeast that makes the bread rise if you do it right. A great example of this, obviously, would be someone like Kelsey Moser. So she was working with H2K this year, didn't create a whole lot of content outside of the odd piece and the videos I did with her. She's now working with 100 Thieves as the head coach of their academy team. Over in Harsha, over in Overwatch, you have Harsha, who's worked with the San Francisco Shock. He used to be doing videos like I do, Thorin's Thought style videos, but obviously I'm not as knowledgeable as him about Overwatch. I used to love watching those videos. Volamel, probably the best journalist in Overwatch at the moment. Someone who has repeatedly been spamming. He wants to work for an org. He wants to make a full-time salary, seemingly. These people could all be people who, if they stuck with it and if they were given the right incentives and people worked with them and had symbiotic relationships, these guys in due time could be fabulous content creators. Some of them already are, could be on the road to being kind of Hall of Fame level content creators and could do so much for those games that they dearly love and that they invested themselves in and dedicated themselves to, even when they made fuck all money and had no trajectory to make any money. Just even beyond the economics of the industry and revenue, we're not maximizing the current ecosystem. These are things that don't even cost money at certain points in time. Yet we're trying to spend money for marketing. We're trying to work with massive orgs that want to get their name out there and brands and sponsors. But how do we get them out there? At the moment, we have limited ways. If you tell them, hey, look at all these like media references I've got to the sponsor and all these things, and had these tied in, and I made that a clause of making the exclusive interview that had to be in association with whatever it might be, Gillette or something. These are clever ways to, for free, min-max your situation and be able to get more exposure for your org, for your players, for your brand, quite frankly. As I said, do you want better content? Well, celebrate and promote it then, and it will naturally grow. That which you send energy to, attention to, you send energy to. You will find, and it grows. Likewise, as I said, it's already the case otherwise. Things wither away when they get none at all. You got to add in, content creators have a hard time building their personal brand. Typically, it's the site that gets all the attention, even to this day, not the personal account of the person or themselves and their personal brand. They just live and die by Reddit or being on a big enough site that can promote their content. You can cut that out. You don't have to deal with the big site necessarily in the same sense. You can deal with individual content creators. They can grow, they can become their own influencers, and when they're people who are aligned or have your interests at heart as well, or shared interests, we can all benefit, we can all succeed, and we can all gain extra footholds and maximize what we have in this ecosystem. Engaging with and cooperating with content creators helps to boost them, and that then plays back as a feedback loop into the engagement of fans with the player and the team and his story. So for example, I always have taken pride with the fact that when I do interviews with players, famously players who are thought to be difficult to deal with, controversial, a bit glib, maybe too black and white or too much flame with what they say. Because I give them time and space and I relate to them and I, on the one hand, put hard questions to them, but I give them a chance to explain themselves. It has been a pretty well-observed trend that with these sorts of players, the Forgivens, the Suazes of the world, I mean, you can go into all sorts of different games, Makalele and CSGO, they tend to come out a lot more favourably. They get a lot more sympathy from the general public, and the public can even get hooked into what might have been kind of a heel narrative before, or a narrative of the anti-hero, or someone who's on the journey, the arc to becoming a face, becoming a popular player, but maybe was disliked even in spite of their skill before. One of the ways that you can see that this works is I have artificially, manually been able to build my own brand. And because I built my own brand big enough that I'm as big as a site out there, as big as a platform, as big as some of the teams in some senses in terms of what I can get out there, you see, I get cooperation from orgs. I get them tell me when players are going to be released. I had Reginald, someone I was literally feuding with for years and had bad blood with and a beef with, coming to me, asking to work with me, and even telling me, I'm doing this because I now recognize you as an influencer, as I see how your brand has grown, and as I see how the cooperation between us is more beneficial than us being at war or a cold war of hostilities and just being separated entirely. We can do more working together than we can apart and against each other. So, sure, I've been able to make it, and I'm not doing this video, by the way, to tell people to retweet my stuff. Doesn't particularly matter to me if you retweet my stuff. I get by without it. I'll live and die without it. And also, you know what? My content might be a bit harsh, and you might not want to be this person who's singing boosters. That's absolutely fine. But there are so many people out there with incredible talent who are not doing anything controversial, who have an amazing skill set for making the content, but they don't have the skill set beyond that to build themselves into an entire brand. Because it's like having a second and third part-time job as well as your main job. Your full-time job is content creation. But then on the side, you've got an entire part-time job of learning the analytics of how to court public opinion, how to find out what people are going to be interested and therefore balance out your content to do what you want to do, but also get enough hits, how to market your content and yourself as a brand so that people want to see your stuff because it's you as well as who the player is in the content, because they want to click on that piece because it has the right title, because they want to get involved with a narrative of a player even though they've heard about that player many times before, because of how well it's crafted and therefore pitched as well. These orgs need endemics, just as endemics need orgs, because ultimately the love of the game came first with the endemic content creator. So he then has skills that he can develop and he can get much better with, and you can even help with that by helping him with his success. If on the other hand you go the other way and you get the non-endemic, he's only there for the short term. He's there for some clicks now, for one nice piece now, and he may never return, as certain people who won awards indeed did so. You can't build artificially love for esports in the same way to the guy who's got the skill set to write the article. It's not going to work as well. It's just not, quite frankly, for him, it's not going to be as efficient and effective. He'd be better off just doing his one-off story and going elsewhere. So if we're going to be pushing this idea of an ecosystem, of everyone having to work together, all being in the same boat, if we're orgs, if we're people in these positions, let's actually take that to heart and let's see what we can do that even selfishly can help us, but can help others and therefore the whole ecosystem in general. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas, Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want to see some teasers? See who's going to be the next guest on one of my shows? Maybe you want to take part in an esports discussion with me. Well, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.